My name is Captain Elena Ward, United States Marine Corps, and the first time I smiled after my mother's funeral was when my stepfather tried to throw me out of the house she left me. Yes, you heard me right. He stood there, chest puffed out, looking me straight in the eye and said, "Pack your bags. This is my home now." And I just smiled, because I knew something he didn't. But let me take you back to the beginning of this story. The church was quiet that morning, heavy with incense and lilies. The air smelled of grief, that strange mix of cologne flowers and tears you only find at funerals. I wore my dress blues. My uniform wasn't just clothing that day, it was armor. I stood stiff shoulders, back medals pinned against my chest, the flag patch gleaming beneath the dim light of stained glass windows. People turned when I walked in, whispering, "That's her daughter, the Marine?" But inside, I wasn't a soldier. I was just a daughter who'd lost her mother. I kept my gaze fixed on the casket, dark oak, polished to a shine with my mother's photo resting gently above it. She was smiling in that picture, her warm, half-laugh smile, the one that made me feel safe even when I was 10 years old and terrified of the world. Beside me stood the man she'd chosen to marry after my father passed away, Richard, my stepfather. He wore a black suit, sharp and expensive, his tie knotted with precision. From the outside, he looked every bit the grieving widower. He dabbed at his eyes with a folded handkerchief, occasionally sniffing, sighing loud enough for the front row to hear. People leaned over to pat his back. But I saw what they didn't. The way his eyes scanned the crowd, cold, calculating like he was taking inventory. The way his hand lingered on the polished pew fingers, tapping restless, as though the funeral wasn't an ending, but a beginning for him. I swallowed down the lump in my throat and folded my hands tight behind my back Marine posture, hiding the storm inside me. Because what no one else knew, what Richard would never suspect, was that Mom had confided in me months before she died. Late one night, sitting in the kitchen with a blanket over her shoulders and a cup of tea in her hand, she'd whispered, "Elena, listen to me carefully. I know Richard means well in some ways, but he's not the man he pretends to be. I need you to know I've made a will. The house, the savings, $600,000 in total, they're yours. I trust you. You've served your country. You've earned the right to protect this family's name." I tried to argue, but she shook her head with that same firm gentleness I'd known all my life. "Promise me you won't tell him not until I'm gone." And I promised. At the funeral, I kept her secret. I watched Richard give his eulogy, dripping with words like love and devotion, while his eyes flicked to the casket, almost like it was a ledger finally closing. He painted himself as the faithful husband, the one who'd stood by her side. But I remembered nights when Mom called me, voice trembling, saying he'd been cold, distant, or too controlling with money. I clenched my jaw as he squeezed my shoulder on the way out, whispering, "We'll be fine, Elena. We'll figure things out." His hand was too tight, his smile too smooth. After the burial, the house was flooded with casseroles, pies, and murmured condolences. Neighbors came and went, setting down dishes wrapped in foil. Richard played host, standing in the doorway, thanking everyone with rehearsed charm. "Yes, thank you for coming. Yes, we'll be all right." I stayed mostly in the corner by the framed photos on the mantel. One picture showed Mom and me on the day I graduated boot camp, her arms wrapped around me, tears streaming down her cheeks as I stood in uniform. Another showed her and Richard on their wedding day. He was smiling, but even then, behind the white boutonniere and tuxedo, I could see it, the hunger in his eyes. That night, when the guests finally left, Richard poured himself a drink. The smell of bourbon filled the living room. He leaned back into Mom's chair, the one she always sat in to read, and spread his legs wide like he was claiming territory. "You'll stay here a while, won't you?" he asked, voice dripping with something that wasn't really kindness. "For now," I said quietly. He nodded, swirling his glass. "Good. It'll be easier this way. You've got the Marines, you're busy. Let me handle the house, the bills, the finances. Your mother trusted me with all of that." I didn't answer. I just let him talk, let him fill the air with his self-appointed authority. My silence was my shield. The days after the funeral passed in slow motion. The house felt different. Mom's laughter was gone, her humming in the kitchen replaced by Richard's heavy footsteps and the clink of ice in his whiskey glass. I walked through the rooms late at night, touching the walls, memorizing every corner, remembering how she'd chosen the curtains, the furniture, the way she planted roses in the backyard. This wasn't his home. This was hers, and by her will, it was mine. I could feel the weight of her trust like a metal pinned over my heart. I'd carried rifles heavier than this, marched under desert suns, hotter than this, but nothing felt as heavy as keeping her secret. And yet, I held it close and tight, waiting. Waiting for the moment Richard would overplay his hand. It came sooner than I expected. 1 week after the funeral, he cornered me in the hallway, his suit jacket draped carelessly, the smell of bourbon still clinging to his breath. His eyes were sharp now, no longer pretending sorrow. "Elena," he said flatly, "you've had your time here, but this isn't your place. This is my home now. Pack your bags." I looked at him calm as steel, remembering my mother's trembling voice in that kitchen, remembering her will, her signature, her faith in me. And I smiled. Not out of joy, not out of malice, but because the battle line had just been drawn, and I knew exactly how this war would end. The morning after his declaration, the house felt colder, emptier, as though Mom's warmth had finally been squeezed out of the walls. I woke early out of habit. Marines don't sleep in, and brewed coffee in the same chipped mug Mom always used. The silence of the kitchen was deafening without her. Richard shuffled in around 8, his silk robe trailing the smell of his aftershave, arriving before he did. He smiled thin and tight, like a man testing how far he could push. "Morning," he said casually, as though he hadn't just ordered me out of the house the night before. I didn't answer right away. I sipped my coffee, stared out the window at the roses Mom had planted, and let the silence stretch. Marines know the power of silence. It makes the other side uneasy. Finally, he sighed and sat across from me. "Listen, Elena," he began. "I know you're grieving. We both are. But things need to move forward. Your mother depended on me. She wanted me to handle the house, the finances, all of it." I raised my eyes and met his. "She never told me that." His lips twitched. He tapped a finger against the table. "Well, she wouldn't burden you with that kind of detail. You've got your career, your deployments, your military things. She didn't want you to worry." The way he said military things made my skin crawl like my service was just a hobby. I didn't bite. I just stared until he looked away. Over the next few days, Richard's mask began to slip further. He played the grieving widower in public, shaking hands, with neighbors offering charming smiles at the grocery store, even telling Mrs. Perkins next door, "Yes, yes, I'll be maintaining the property now. It's a big responsibility, but that's what husbands do." Behind closed doors, though, the charm cracked. One afternoon, I came back from the base and found him changing the locks on the back door. "What are you doing?" I asked. He jumped slightly, then forced a laugh. "Oh, just routine security. You know times are tough. Can't be too careful." With Mom's key still in the drawer, I countered, my voice sharp. He shrugged. "Keys get lost. People talk. Better safe than sorry." But I saw it in his eyes. This wasn't about security. It was about control. He was quietly erasing her, erasing me. The real test came when I noticed the mantle. Mom's framed photo, the one I'd stared at through the entire funeral, was gone. In its place sat a crystal decanter of bourbon and 2 heavy glasses. "Where's Mom's picture?" I demanded, voice lower than I meant it to be. Richard appeared from the study, already loosening his tie. I put it away. "Looking at it every day. It's depressing. We need to move on." I clenched my fists. "That's not your call." He smirked, tilting his head. "Elena, you need to accept reality. She's gone. This is my house now, and soon I'll be making decisions you'll thank me for." The arrogance in his tone burned hotter than the bourbon he loved so much. He wasn't even hiding it anymore. Still, he wasn't reckless. Richard wrapped his cruelty in silk. He'd leave notes for neighbors. Elena is grieving, but she'll be moving on soon. He spoke to me in the kitchen, where no one could hear, but to visitors, he draped an arm around my shoulder, smiling like he was protecting me. At night, I could hear him on the phone, low voice, talking about listing the house and liquid assets. The man was already planning to sell the roof over my head, the home my mother had chosen, loved, and left to me. The tension built slowly, like pressure under a lid. He stopped asking me if I needed anything. Instead, he began telling me what to do. Don't leave your boots by the door. They make the house look messy. Stay out of the study. I've got important paperwork in there. This is my living room chair. Find another one. Each command was small, almost laughable on its own, but together they painted a clear picture. He was pushing me to the margins, step by step. And every time I thought of Mom, the way she warned me he isn't what he seems. I realized now she'd seen it coming, his hunger, his ambition. She hadn't trusted him with her legacy. That trust was mine to carry. Then came the night he crossed a line. I was sitting on the porch, uniform jacket draped over the railing, the cicadas buzzing in the humid dark. Richard stepped out with his glass, the ice clinking like tiny bells. "You know," he said softly, staring at the yard, "your mother wanted stability. She wanted a man who could handle money, handle property, handle everything she left behind." He turned to me, his eyes narrowing. "She told me herself, said you'd never settle, never stay put. That's why she chose me." I swallowed hard. It was a lie. I knew it. Mom never said those words, but the way he delivered it with confidence, with that calm, manipulative certainty, made me wonder how many people he'd already convinced. He leaned in closer, breath heavy with bourbon. "So when I tell you to pack your bags, Elena, don't take it personal. It's just business." I met his gaze, unflinching. I wanted to shout, to call him out, to throw the truth in his face. But instead, I remembered my training. Hold the line. Wait for the right moment. So I smiled, faintly, turned back to the yard and let him think he'd won that round. Inside, though, I was already planning. I pulled out Mom's will from the folder where I'd kept it hidden, reread every line, every signature, every notarized stamp. $600,000. The house. All to me. No mention of Richard. None. He thought he was clever, thought he was pushing me out slowly, bit by bit. But what he didn't know was that the battlefield was already tilted. He was marching straight into a trap my mother had set long before she died, a trap sealed with ink and law. I traced her signature with my finger, whispering, "I'll wait, Mom. I'll let him show who he really is. And when the time comes, he'll have nothing left to hide behind." Richard believed he was tightening the noose around me, but in truth, he was only wrapping it around his own neck. And I was going to be the one to pull. By the third week after the funeral, the house no longer smelled like Mom's lavender candles or her apple pies cooling on the counter. It smelled like bourbon cigars, and Richard's cologne, the kind that came in a glass bottle shaped like a chess piece. He filled the house with himself bit by bit like a slow invasion. At first, it was the little things, rearranging furniture, moving Mom's sewing kit to the attic, boxing up her cookbooks. He never asked. He never consulted me. He just did it, humming under his breath as if the house had always been his. "Mom liked that chair by the window," I said one afternoon, watching him drag it across the floor. He grunted. "Well, I like it here by the fireplace. Better lighting." And just like that, her touch was erased from another corner. Richard was careful. He never outright threatened me in public. Instead, he built a performance. Neighbors who dropped by to check on us left impressed by how strong and steady he seemed. "Richard's really holding things together," Mrs. Perkins told me as she handed over a casserole. "You're lucky to have him." Lucky. The word burned like acid. I wanted to tell her everything that he was plotting, manipulating, stripping my mother's soul from the home she loved. But what good would it do? Without proof, I'd sound like a bitter stepdaughter, clinging to grief. Richard knew that. He thrived on appearances. He grew bolder as the days passed. One evening, I came home to find a real estate agent's card on the kitchen counter. My heart sank as I turned it over his name, scrawled on the back, "Talk soon, interested buyer." I stormed into the study where Richard sat with papers spread across Mom's old oak desk. He looked up, unfazed. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, slamming the card onto the desk. He arched an eyebrow. "A conversation starter." "You're selling the house?" "Exploring options," he said, smoothly swirling his drink. "The market's strong. We'd be fools not to consider it." "We?" I echoed, voice sharp. "Yes, Elena. You're here temporarily. You'll be redeployed eventually. This house is wasted space on you. Your mother trusted me to handle things. I'm just doing what she would have wanted." My fists curled tight at my sides, the nerve of him invoking her name. But I kept my voice even. "Funny. She told me something different." For the first time, his eyes flickered. A brief crack in the mask. But then, he leaned back smirking. "People say all sorts of things when they're sick. Memories get muddled. Best not to hang on too tightly." I wanted to throw the will on the table right then and there, to watch his smug grin crumble, but I didn't. Not yet. Timing is everything in war. Richard's tactics shifted. He began planting seeds of doubt, trying to make me feel like a guest in my own home. He'd leave boxes by the door. For when you move your things out, he'd say, casually sipping his bourbon. He started locking the study when he wasn't in it, jingling the keys in his pocket like trophies. He even called the utility company to update the account in his name, conveniently forgetting to mention me. "Streamlining," he said with that silky tone, as though he were doing me a favor. Every move was calculated, designed to push me closer to the edge, to make me question my standing. But he underestimated me. He mistook my silence for surrender. At night, I sat in Mom's old room, the will spread open across the quilt she'd sewn by hand. I read it over and over, tracing the words like scripture. I, Margaret Ward, being of sound mind, leave my house and savings totaling $600,000 solely to my daughter, Elena Ward. No ambiguity, no loophole, just clarity, strength, and trust. Her voice echoed in my memory. "You've served your country. You'll protect what I leave behind." It wasn't just about money or property. It was about her legacy, her dignity. If Richard had his way, he'd sell it all, pocket what he could, and let her memory rot. Not on my watch. One Saturday, he tested me again. A couple came by, well-dressed, clutching brochures. Richard greeted them at the door, hand extended like a gracious host. "Welcome, welcome," he said warmly. "Come in, take a look around. Lovely bones in this house, plenty of charm." I stepped out from the hallway, arms crossed. "What's going on here?" The couple looked between us, confused. Richard's smile tightened. "Just giving some friends a tour, exploring options, like I said." "This house isn't for sale," I said firmly, meeting the couple's eyes. "Not now, not ever." The man cleared his throat awkwardly. "Perhaps we should come back another time." "No need," I interrupted. "There will never be another time. Enjoy your afternoon." They left quickly, murmuring apologies. Richard shut the door with more force than necessary. His jaw clenched. "You embarrassed me," he hissed. I held his gaze, unflinching. "You embarrassed yourself." For a moment, the mask slipped entirely. His eyes hardened, venomous. Then, as quickly as it came, the charm returned. "We'll see about that." That night, I dreamed of Mom. She stood in the kitchen apron, tied around her waist, flour, dusting her hands. She looked at me the way she used to when I doubted myself, with quiet strength. "You know what to do," she said simply. I woke with the will still clutched in my hands, her words echoing in my mind. Richard thought he was orchestrating everything. He thought he had me cornered, isolated, powerless. But in reality, he was digging his own grave with every smug smile, every false word, every lock changed and box packed. Because the moment was coming, the moment when I'd stop smiling silently and finally speak. And when that moment came, he'd learn the truth. This house wasn't his. The money wasn't his. And the future he imagined was never his to claim. By the fourth week, I stopped feeling like a daughter in mourning and started feeling like a soldier on reconnaissance. Every move Richard made was like an enemy maneuver, predictable if you studied his patterns closely. I woke early, trained at the base, came home to observe. He thought he was tightening his grip, but really he was showing me his entire playbook. He spent afternoons in the study with the door-locked phone pressed to his ear. At night, he sat in Mom's chair swirling bourbon, muttering to himself about buyers and liquidation. I'd catch scraps of conversation. She won't fight it. Military doesn't pay much. It's just business. He thought I was invisible, but I was listening. Always listening. I played my part well. I kept the house spotless, boots tucked neatly away, uniforms pressed. I answered politely when spoken to. To anyone on the outside, I looked like a respectful stepdaughter trying to get along. Inside, though, I was gathering ammunition. I visited the lawyer, quietly, sliding Mom's will across the polished mahogany desk. The attorney, a stout man with wire-rimmed glasses, read it carefully, nodding. "This is airtight," he said. "Your mother left no ambiguity. The house and the 600,000 are yours." "Can he contest it?" I asked. He shook his head. "He wasn't mentioned. He has no legal standing. He can bluster, threaten posture all he wants, but in the eyes of the law, he has nothing." Those words settled deep in my bones like steel reinforcement. I left the office taller, calmer, more certain than ever. When I returned that evening, Richard was waiting. He leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, a smug grin plastered across his face. "Busy day?" he asked. I shrugged. "Errands." "Errands," he repeated slowly, savoring the word. "I hope you're not wasting time. You'll need your energy when you move out." I poured myself a glass of water. Steady hands, steady voice. "I'll manage." He chuckled, shaking his head as though I were a silly child. "Always so stubborn. You think you're tough because you wear a uniform. But toughness doesn't pay bills, Elena. It doesn't keep a roof over your head. Money does, property does. And I'm the one in control of that." I sipped the water, turned to him with a faint smile, and said nothing. That silence rattled him more than any insult could. In the days that followed, I focused on my own rhythm. Morning runs, push-ups in the backyard, polishing my boots until they gleamed. Every repetition was a reminder: discipline wins wars. Meanwhile, Richard grew sloppy. His arrogance ballooned. He started bringing business associates into the housemen in suits who nodded as he bragged about my property and my investments. I lingered in the hall listening. "She's military," he explained once, waving a dismissive hand. "Always gone, never around. The house is wasted on her. Once she's out, I'll flip it. Easy profit." They chuckled, sipping their drinks, already picturing the deal. I memorized every word, every lie. At night, I walked the rooms alone. The house whispered with memories. Mom's sewing machine in the corner, the faded curtain. She insisted on keeping the roses outside that bloomed red as blood in the moonlight. "This is yours," I whispered to her photo. "I'll guard it like I guarded my platoon." I sat with the will spread before me, reading it until the words were burned into my mind. My mother's voice echoed, "Promise me, Elena. Promise me you'll protect it." "I promise," I whispered back. One evening, Richard finally snapped the mask off. He stumbled into the living room, half-drunk, tie, loose eyes bloodshot. He dropped a folder onto the coffee table. Papers spilled out, real estate listings, estimates, contracts half filled. "It's happening," he slurred, grinning wide. "The house, the money, everything. I've lined it up, Elena. We're cashing out." "We?" I asked softly. "Of course," he said, lifting his glass. "I'll handle it all. You can have a little something, maybe a car, a trip. You don't need responsibility. You've got the Marines. Let the grown man handle the grown man's business." He toasted himself and drained the glass. I stared at the papers, my calm, steady as ever. This was it. He was overreaching. He was exposing himself. The storm was coming, and I was ready. The next morning, I ironed my dress blues. Every crease sharp, every metal polished. When I caught my reflection in the mirror, I saw not just a soldier, but a daughter carrying her mother's legacy. I tucked the will into a leather folder, slid it into my satchel, and set it by the door. Richard walked past, eyebrows raised. Going somewhere. Just errands, I said again, voice light. He smirked, satisfied with the illusion that he still held control. But the truth was, I wasn't running errands anymore. I was preparing for battle. The calm before the storm wasn't about silence. It was about control. Marines don't lash out at the first provocation. We wait, we plan, we strike when the enemy is most exposed. Richard had exposed himself completely. His arrogance had inflated into a balloon, and all I needed to do was hold the pin steady. I thought of Mom again, her last words to me. Not the whispered fears, not the warnings about Richard's nature, but the look she gave me in the hospital, her hand squeezing mine weakly. You're stronger than you know, Elena. Stronger than him. Stronger than all of this. I carried those words like a rifle on my shoulder. And when the moment came, I would fire. It happened on a Thursday evening quiet, except for the hum of cicadas outside and the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. The air was heavy with summer heat, the kind that clung to your skin and made tempers short. I'd been waiting for this moment, sharpening it in my mind like a bayonet. And Richard, arrogant, bloated with bourbon, and his own lies delivered it right to my doorstep. He stormed into the living room holding another folder of papers. His tie was half undone, his face red, and his breath carried that sour, sweet tang of whiskey. "Elena!" he barked, tossing the folder onto the coffee table. "Enough of this charade. I've had the contracts drafted. The realtor is lined up. We're putting the house on the market next week." I looked up from Mom's chair, the very one he used to sit in smugly. "Tonight, I claimed it." "You think so?" I asked evenly. His eyebrows shot up at my tone. "I don't think. I know. This is my decision, my responsibility. You've lingered long enough. Your mother trusted me. You're just—" He waved a hand dismissive. "You're just passing through." I stood slowly, every movement, precise, deliberate, like stepping onto a battlefield. "You're wrong." Richard smirked, shaking his head as if I were a naive child. "You Marines, always so dramatic. Look around, Elena. Everything here is mine. The neighbors see me as the man of the house. The bills are in my name. The paperwork is in motion. You've got nothing." I took a breath, steadying myself. The air felt electric, crackling against my skin. This was it. "Funny," I said softly, my voice cutting through the room like a blade. "That's exactly what Mom wrote in her will." The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Richard froze. His smirk faltered, his jaw slackening just slightly. For the first time since Mom's funeral, he looked unsure. "What did you say?" he demanded, his voice higher, thinner. I didn't flinch. I walked to the side table, pulled out the leather folder I'd kept hidden, and laid it gently on top of his scattered contracts. The contrast was striking, his flimsy, unsigned papers beneath the weight of Mom's notarized will. "This," I said, sliding it toward him, "is the truth. This house. The $600,000. All of it. Mom left it to me, not you, not us, me." His hands trembled as he snatched the document, flipping through pages, eyes darting across the legal text. His face drained of color. "No, this can't be," he muttered. "It can," I replied. "And it is. She knew who you were, Richard. She knew better than to trust you." He slammed the folder shut, veins bulging in his forehead. "She wouldn't do this to me. She loved me." "Loved you enough to see through you," I shot back, voice steady. "She saw the greed, the control, the way you put yourself first. That's why she gave everything to me. She trusted me to protect her legacy." He staggered back, shaking his head violently like he could dislodge reality. "No! No, you're lying! You forged this! You—" "It's notarized," I interrupted. "Witnessed. Filed. Legal in every sense of the word. You can check with the county clerk if you want. but I wouldn't waste the gas. Silence fell heavy. The clock ticked on. Richard collapsed into the sofa, his bravado crumbling. His hands pressed against his face, dragging down until his eyes peered at me through shaking fingers. All this time, he whispered. All this time, and you just... Let me think. Yes, I said coldly. I let you show who you really are. Every smug word, every lock you changed, every time you tried to erase her from this house. I wanted you to reveal yourself. And you did. I leaned forward, my voice a whisper, but sharper than any shout. You lost before the game even began. He shot to his feet, fury flashing again. You think this is over? I've got connections. You've got nothing, I cut him off, my tone final. The law is on my side. The neighbors you charmed. They'll know the truth soon enough. And whatever connections you think you have won't change the ink on that will. Richard opened his mouth to argue, but no words came. His throat worked soundlessly, his pride collapsing under the weight of undeniable fact. I watched him, a strange calm settling over me. For weeks I'd endured his manipulation, his arrogance, his lies. And now, with just a single sentence and a leather folder, the entire house of cards had fallen. He finally sank back down, defeated. His shoulders slumped, his eyes dull. You planned this, he said almost in awe. No, I replied, straightening my uniform jacket. Mom did. I just carried it out. I turned, walking toward the doorway, pausing only once. You said to pack my bags, Richard. But maybe you should start packing yours. The look on his face, rage, disbelief, humiliation burned into my memory. But I didn't need to gloat. Revenge isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about standing tall when the other side finally sees they've already lost. And as I walked out into the night air, the cicadas buzzing the sky heavy with stars, I felt the weight of my mother's trust settle like armor around me. The battle was over, but the war of dignity, her dignity was mine to win in full. The morning after I showed Richard the will, the house was silent. Not the comfortable silence of dawn when Mom used to hum while making coffee, but a heavy, strained silence that felt like the air itself was holding its breath. I rose early as always, the discipline of the Corps carved into my bones. My boots hit the floor with purpose. When I entered the kitchen, Richard was already there, slouched in his chair with a glass of bourbon sweating in his hand at 7 a.m. His eyes were bloodshot. His shirt wrinkled his entire frame, sagging like a balloon losing air. He didn't look at me when I poured my coffee. He just muttered, "It's not fair." I leaned against the counter, sipping slowly, letting the bitterness burn down my throat. Fair has nothing to do with it. This is the law. This is Mom's word. Finally, he looked up, his expression raw, stripped of all charm. She betrayed me. No, I said quietly, meeting his eyes. She saw you clearly. That's not betrayal. That's truth. Later that day, I called the lawyer. We sat in his office, the will spread across his desk, Richard sullen in the corner, arms crossed like a punished schoolboy. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. Mr. Garrison, I've reviewed everything carefully. This will is legitimate. Filed properly, notarized, witnessed. There's no room for contest. The estate, including the house, and the $600,000 belongs to Elena. Richard's jaw clenched. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the arm of his chair. The lawyer continued, calm but firm. You have no legal claim. I advise you to accept this outcome gracefully. Gracefully, Richard spat, finally. Breaking. She's stealing everything from me. I leaned forward, my voice steady. I'm not stealing. I'm protecting what Mom entrusted to me. She made her choice. You just don't like it. The weeks that followed were a slow unraveling for Richard. The man who once strutted around the neighborhood as though he owned every inch of property now avoided eye contact with neighbors. Word spread quickly, as it always does. Mrs. Perkins stopped me one afternoon, her brow furrowed. Elena, I heard about the will. Is it true? I nodded. It is. Her lips pursed, and she glanced toward Richard, who was fumbling with the trash bins at the curb. Well, that explains a lot. The illusion was gone. His carefully constructed mask had shattered. No amount of bourbon or forced smiles could rebuild it. Inside the house, he grew restless. He paced the halls like a caged animal, muttering under his breath. Sometimes I caught him staring at the walls at Mom's pictures I'd rehung on the mantel as though they mocked him. One night he exploded. "You think you've won, don't you?" he shouted, slamming his glass onto the counter. "You think you're so righteous standing there in your uniform, holding your mother's will like a shield. But you're nothing without her. You hear me? Nothing." I stood tall shoulders, squared calm in the face of his rage. I was something before you ever came into her life, and I'll be something long after you're gone. He stared at me, chest heaving, but there was nothing left behind his fury. He turned and stumbled down the hall, slamming the bedroom door behind him. The next morning, I found a suitcase by the front door. Richard emerged, unshaven, eyes hollow. "I'm leaving," he said simply. I nodded. "Probably the smartest choice you've made." He glared at me, but there was no venom left, only exhaustion. "She should have trusted me," he muttered. "She did trust you," I replied, my tone soft but final. "And you proved her right not to." He picked up the suitcase and walked out without another word. The door closed behind him with a hollow thud that echoed through the house like the final note of a requiem. The days after his departure felt different. The air was lighter. The rooms felt warmer. I moved through the house like I was finally able to breathe again. I opened windows, let sunlight flood the halls, and lit the lavender candles Mom loved. For the first time since she passed, the house smelled like home. I tended the roses in the backyard, trimming the stems, watering carefully. As the sun set, their petals glowed crimson, and I felt Mom's presence beside me. "You did it, Elena," I whispered. "You kept your promise." The lawyer finalized the transfer of assets within a month. The house was officially mine. The $600,000 sitting in an account under my name represented not just security, but responsibility. I didn't celebrate. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table one evening, staring at the paperwork, thinking about Mom. Money couldn't bring her back. A house couldn't fill the silence she left. But honoring her wishes, protecting what she built, that was something. I wasn't just a soldier carrying out orders. I was her daughter carrying out her last command. Neighbors eventually asked what happened to Richard. I gave simple answers. He moved on. They didn't press. They didn't need to. Everyone had seen the truth for themselves. I wasn't cruel. I didn't gloat. Revenge doesn't always come in shouting or slamming doors. Sometimes it comes in the quiet dignity of standing firm, of refusing to be erased. Richard left with nothing but a suitcase. I remained with everything my mother left me, not just money or property, but dignity, trust, and a legacy worth protecting. And as I walked through the halls at night, the floorboards creaking beneath my boots, I knew this house was no longer a battleground. It was sanctuary. My name is Captain Elena Ward, and though I fought battles overseas, nothing compared to the quiet war I fought inside my own home. It wasn't fought with rifles or in deserts or jungles. It was fought with silence, patience, and truth. And in the end, the truth won. When Richard walked out of that house for the last time, suitcase in hand, I stood at the window and watched him go. The streetlight cast his shadow long and thin, like a man stretched beyond his limits. He didn't look back. Not once. And I didn't need him to. The chapter of his deceit had closed. The house was mine, not because I demanded it, not because I screamed louder, but because my mother had chosen to protect her legacy. I was just the executor of her trust. But the strangest thing was what I felt afterward. Not triumph, not gloating, not the kind of victory you celebrate with champagne. What I felt was peace. I spent the next weeks restoring the home to what it was meant to be. I rehung Mom's photos in the hallway, put her chair back by the window where she liked it, and reopened the attic boxes Richard had shoved out of sight. Her cookbooks returned to the kitchen shelf stained with flour and years of use. Her sewing kit sat once more by the couch thread still wrapped around a needle she must have left mid-project. It was like stitching her memory back into the walls. The house breathed again. Not just wood and nails, but love and laughter, tears and prayers, history and belonging. Neighbors stopped by more often now. Mrs. Perkins brought her peach cobbler warm from the oven. "Feels like your mother's home again," she said softly, glancing around the living room. I smiled. That's what I wanted. And when people spoke of Richard, it was always in passing, as though he were a figure who had drifted through like a storm cloud, temporary dark, but gone at last. The truth was clear: you can fake kindness for a time, but eventually, greed shows through. People remember who stood tall when it mattered. Sometimes late at night, I'd sit in my uniform by the roses outside the ones Mom planted, blooming proud and red under the moonlight. I'd run my hand across the petals and think about everything she'd given me, not just the money, not just the house, but her belief in me. Her last gift wasn't wealth, it was trust. And that trust anchored me more firmly than any medal or rank. I think back to Richard's face when I told him funny that's exactly what Mom wrote in her will. That moment wasn't just revenge, it was justice. It was dignity reclaimed. It was the quiet reminder that no matter how clever or manipulative someone pretends to be, truth has a way of cutting through the lies. And it taught me something I'll carry for the rest of my life. Revenge doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes the sharpest blade is patience. Sometimes the sweetest victory is silence, letting the other person bury themselves under their own greed while you stand firm. Now, every time I walk through the house, boots clicking against hardwood floors, I feel her with me. I hear her laugh in the kitchen. I smell her lavender in the hallway. I see her smile in the framed photos, the same smile I carried to the funeral in my dress blues. The house is safe, the money is safe, but more importantly, her name is safe. Richard wanted to erase me, to erase her, to rewrite the story, as if he were the central figure. But in the end, he wrote himself out. And I remained. So what did I learn? That strength isn't always about combat or medals or uniforms. Sometimes it's about holding your ground in the quietest of wars. Sometimes it's about honoring promises when no one else can see. Sometimes it's about simply smiling when the moment comes, because you already know how the story will end. If you're listening to this, maybe you faced someone like Richard in your own life. Someone who wore a mask of charm, who tried to push you aside, who thought they could rewrite your story. My message to you is this: hold your ground. Protect what matters. And remember that silence, patience, and truth are stronger weapons than any lie. Thank you for walking through this story with me. If it touched you, if you felt a piece of your own journey reflected here, I'd ask you to share it with someone who might need the reminder. And if you'd like to hear more stories of resilience, justice, and quiet strength, I'd invite you to subscribe to stay connected. Because sometimes the most powerful battles aren't fought overseas. They're fought right here in our homes, in our families, in the legacies we're entrusted to protect. And those battles, when fought with dignity, can change everything.